From the mental well-being the visitation of songbirds to a garden brings, to the physical and emotional trauma precipitated by the attack of large predators, human-wildlife interactions span a broad spectrum, one that can deeply impact upon the quality of human life. Hello River Red Gums, I'm Ben Carlson, and today I'll be speaking to you about human-wildlife interactions in peri-urban areas. Using a case study to demonstrate, I'll discuss how this can become problematic in a political, social, economic, and environmental sense. It is an issue that divides many of its stakeholders and thus can be difficult to manage as a natural resource manager. The exponentially increasing human population, coupled with a rising rate of urbanization, is resulting in an unprecedented level of urban sprawl. One flow-on effect of this is the continual encroachment of human settlements upon the habitat of fauna, which leads to more human-wildlife interactions. This rural-urban fringe is termed the peri-urban area. The addition of humanity to ecological complex adaptive systems carries profound impacts, pushing them beyond thresholds into new basins of attraction. As existing habitat is fragmented or lost, a new habitat, one with considerably lower biodiversity, is created. The nutrient cycling, soil geochemistry, hydrology, and temperature of the region are all altered. New pressures are also introduced, such as invasive species and both noise and light pollution. The net result of this is a habitat that is challenging for many species to exist within, filtering out those that cannot adapt to this new niche environment, which is generally those with a specialist diet. But some wildlife is able to exist and potentially thrive under these new conditions in the peri-urban zone. While living in such close proximity to human populations, it is highly likely that many of these animals will come in contact with their human neighbours. These interactions range in frequency and intensity, as well as whether they are of a positive or negative nature. While human-wildlife conflict is a term commonly cited in the literature, there exists no term for positive interactions, displaying an apparent research bias. Across the urban-rural gradient, the rate of human-wildlife interactions increase exponentially. Over the last few decades, as the urban environment continues to encroach upon surrounding natural wildlife habitat, the number of human-wildlife conflicts have greatly increased. These interactions occur when the wildlife's activities, such as those that are associated with reproduction or foraging, have a negative impact upon humanity. These impacts can either be primary or secondary. Primary impacts are the behaviors of wildlife that result in the destruction of human property, loss of produce, or in direct bodily harm to humans or their pets. These fall into three categories: predatory, defensive, or territorial. Secondary impacts are more subtle, such as the transmission of zoonoses or parasites. In Australia, these interactions range from the tearing up of a garden by brush turkeys, wild goats, and wallabies, to livestock and even humans being killed by one of the 23 million feral pigs we have in Australia. Another great source of conflict is the hysteria surrounding the contraction of the sporadically fatal zoonotic diseases, the Australian bat lyssavirus and the Hendra virus, from flying foxes roosting in urban areas. While negative interactions receive the most attention in both the media and scientific literature, the presence of wildlife in peri-urban areas does enable scientific, aesthetic, recreational, and most importantly psychological health-related benefits, on top of the intrinsic value of the animals themselves. An increase in the region's biodiversity also boosts the functionality of the area's ecosystem services. Flying foxes are the largest flying mammals in the world. These nomadic species subsist primarily upon blossoms and fruit and are nocturnal, roosting in large arboreal colonies. These colonies currently range in population from thousands to tens of thousands, though historical ecological records claim that colonies numbering in the millions once existed. They perform a valuable ecological role, pollinating native flora whilst also acting as vectors for seed dispersal. Due to anthropogenic habitat destruction, their population has been in a state of steep decline since the advent of European colonisation, and they are currently protected under Australian legislation. Two of the species, the grey-headed and spectacled, have lost more than 95% of their population and are classed as endangered. Since the 1970s, there has been a large push for the planting of native species within urban areas. This, coupled with the loss of their traditional habitat, has caused many colonies of flying foxes to migrate into peri-urban and even urban landscapes. The close proximity of these roosts has become the cause of great political contention. Key issues revolve around several topics: the aforementioned zoonoses, the loud sounds and strong odours they produce, and the death of the trees they roost within. One of the most publicised instances of this was the relocation of the colony of approximately 22,000 individuals that had been living within the Sydney Royal Botanical Gardens for 20 years. 47 mature trees in the garden had been killed, and an additional 300 were impacted and at risk of being lost. While the botanists at the Royal Botanical Gardens believe flying foxes are an important element of a healthy ecosystem, the sheer number of bats in the gardens was overwhelming the plants, which are their priority. They thus in 2009 requested that the bats be moved to another area. In 2010, the then Minister for the Environment, Peter Garrett, approved the $2.2 million relocation program, triggering great public outcry. Heading the opposition was the conservation group Bat Advocacy, which took the decision to the federal court. They claimed that it had failed to be taken into account that the gardens were critical roosting habitat for the endangered species, and that the bats would simply create further issues at a new urban site. The appeal lost, and in 2012 the bat colony was removed from the area by disturbing the bats as they returned to roost each morning with loud heavy metal music. Many members of the scientific community believe that displacing the bats is only the treating of a symptom, not the underlying problem. Despite this, there has thus far been no negative flow-on effects. The situation in the Sydney Royal Botanical Gardens was resolved in a peaceful manner, the relocation of the bats monitored by specialist ecologists, their progress tracked by radio and satellite collars to ensure they reached a safe destination. But the situation has climaxed far more violently in other areas of Australia, where the bats have been inhumanely killed, either by netting or gunfire. Human-wildlife interactions are incorporated into myriad complex adaptive systems, and as such have impacts that are far more expansive than what is immediately obvious. This is an area that requires continued academic attention, with particular emphasis placed upon expanding the literature body on the benefits of these interactions for humanity. Thank you for listening. I look forward to engaging with each of you in the week to come. Here are this week's discussion questions.